Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lysha from Lysha Be Creative, and now that it is officially September, I feel like it's time for us to delve right into the spooky season. So today's tumbler tutorial is a very beginner friendly tumbler, Halloween themed of course, as we get right into the spooky season. So of course everything that I use will be listed and linked in the description box below. Check that description box out for discount codes as well as links to all of my social media and of course my Facebook group, Lysha Be Creative Community. Lastly, if you haven't, give this video a huge thumbs up if you enjoyed the tutorial today, as well as subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my future videos. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's spooky Halloween themed tutorial. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So what I have here is a 24-ounce plump from the Steel Magnolia. I've already spray painted it with a pumpkin spice orange from Krylon. I will list that in the description box. And I've already also put a thin coat of epoxy on my cup. So if you need help with doing epoxy method glitter, please feel free to check back at my past videos. I do a lot of epoxy method glitter work in all of those, so wanted to leave that out. So I'm going to cover this entire cup in the Swamp from Peachy Olive Glitters. This is a metallic orange color, and what I love about Peachy Olive Glitters, as I think I've said many times before, is I'm only going to need to do one coat of this glitter. It is full coverage glitter, and as long as I have covered my entire cup in that thin layer of epoxy, then I don't have to worry about any of my glitter not sticking in any places. So that is something that I certainly love about doing epoxy method over Mod Podge, just because I feel like with Mod Podge, I personally feel like I need to go in with a second coat in order to get the full coverage that I want. So I'm just going to go back through and ensure that my entire cup is covered in this orange glitter. I'll use my scissors to tap off any of the extra glitter that may not be sticking to the cup, to then leave this on my turner for 2 hours to dry, and then I'm going to apply 2 coats of epoxy until smooth. My cup has now had 2 coats of epoxy on it. My first coat was 30 ml and my second coat was 20 ml of amazing clear cast quick coat. So I am now just going to sand the top and bottom rim. Because we used a fine glitter, the Swamp is such a fine glitter that there's not a whole lot of sanding to do other than the top and bottom rim. So I'm starting with an 80 grit around the top rim, and then I'll do a 120 to follow up to make sure it's smooth and I have no lumps and bumps in my final coats of epoxy. So now that that is all finished, I'm going to just wash off my cup with some rubbing alcohol here on a paper towel, and then I'm going to measure my cup. So I'm measuring my cup so that I can do the full wrap decal I'm creating, and you want to measure your cup before or after you've done your epoxy, not before, because obviously the width of your cup is going to change based on how thick your layers of epoxy are. So definitely a tip to think about when you are choosing to do a full wrap on your cup. So I'm going to measure my cup and then create my decal next. Okay, so now we're in Cricut Design Space, and I'm going to upload the 2 images that I'm going to be using today. So the first image is a skull and moon image, which I got from Sassy Tumbler Graphics. So I have a link to her shop in the description, as well as a discount code for you to save 40% off any of your purchases, excluding her $1 files. So make sure you check that out if you're looking to recreate this look. So I'm just going to get my images uploaded into Cricut Design Space. So starting with the skull, and then I'll go back and I'm going to upload the bats that are going to be the full wrap image that we're going for. So make sure that you're saving this image specifically as a print then cut, because of course we want to be able to see all of those beautiful colors on the image. We don't want our image to be one solid color. So as soon as that has been uploaded into Cricut Design Space, I'm going to go back into my files and I will also upload this bat image. So the bat image I purchased from another Etsy shop, which I will link in the description box below. A super cute full wrap that is great for putting on cups, or what I'm going to utilize on this cup today. So you can certainly choose to do it the way that I've done it, or you are more than welcome obviously to do it differently. Maybe you want to add pumpkins, or you'd like to add spiders or something else that's super spooky for the Halloween season. Completely up to you. Obviously you have free range of your design here, but I love that there's just so many different ideas that you can do with such a basic glittered cup. So I feel like sometimes we forget as tumbler creators that, you know, sometimes simple is just as fantastic as something that has lots of glitter and lots of different color. So that's what I love most about this design. So now I'm going to upload both of them into my canvas here. Obviously they're going to show up very large, and I'm going to resize them to be smaller. So I like to just make them, I usually start with like size 3 inches of both and then size my canvas appropriately, just so I can make sure I can see them and move them around first, but whatever works for you. So now that my images are both sized much smaller, I'm going to change how big each of them are to what I need them to be. So I'm going to make my skull image be about 3.5 inches wide. And this is pretty standard for the imaging that I use for just one decal on a 24-ounce plump, a 20-ounce or a 24-ounce plump. It's just it's large enough, but it's not too large that I have to worry about any crazy warping. So now we're going to work with the bats. So the bats I've sized to fit the dimensions of my cup. So I've sized them to be about 9.75 inches wide by about 8 inches in height. Okay. So now I'm going to get out a square, which I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to mimic the dimensions of my cup. So again, 9.75 in width and 8 inches in height. And the reason why I'm doing this is because this is going to be my mini canvas, so to speak, of my tumbler, and how I'm going to make sure that both my images are going to fit on my tumbler without having to do any guesswork. So now I'm just going to change the color of that to white so I can see all of the images that I am placing on top of them. So now that I am moving all of my images to the forefront, I'm going to start with the skull. So I'm going to place the skull directly in the middle of the canvas, the square rectangle that I've created there. I'm going to then select both of those images, and I'm going to center it. And this is just to make sure that obviously my skull is directly centered in the square and isn't off in any way, shape, or form. So as soon as I have done that, I'm going to then take my bats, so my bat full wrap there, and I'm going to place that on the rectangle image next. So as soon as I place it on, now I can unlock that square image there and make that image fit onto my rectangle perfectly. So I'm not really worried about lining up, so to speak. I just want to make sure that my bats don't go outside of the rectangle that I have as my base. So now that that piece is done, I'm now going to go through and choose the bats that are covering my skull image, because I don't want to place an image on top of one another, because that would then create some lumps and bumps in my decals, which you'd be able to see under epoxy. So I'm going to then select the bats that are specifically covering the skull or interfering with the skull and make them unseen, so that when I print this decal, I'm only cutting the decals, the bat decals around that image. With the bats that were covering my image gone, I'm now going to duplicate the bat image, and I'm just going to select one of the bats that I want to use to fill the 2 large empty white spaces I have now on my canvas. So you can choose any of the bats you wanted. I just went through and hid all of the bats I didn't want to use and just literally picked whichever one was left, so to speak, so that I could create the additional decals I'd need to go in those 2 open spaces. So as soon as I have all the other bats hidden, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one bat and duplicate it again, because I know I have 2 spaces that I need to cover up. So then I'm just going to place the bats on my canvas, and I'm going to turn them and make them fit in the spaces so that it looks natural and doesn't look weirdly placed, and so that it doesn't cover that middle skull decal. So once I'm fine with the placement, I'll then move the other bat into place, again ensuring that it's not interfering with the skull or any of the other bats around it. So now that I have my bats placed where I need them to be, I'm going to select the original bat image with the 2 duplicate images, and I'm going to select attach. And I'm doing this because I want to make sure that the bats are all going to print on one piece of my black vinyl and not have to print them on multiple sheets and then use transfer tape to have to place those afterward. So now that I have those attached, I'm going to then get rid of my square because I no longer need it anymore, or my rectangle I should say, and then I'm going to get both of these printed and the bats cut. So I printed cut my bats on a matte vinyl that I have, and I then used the skull was printed on printable vinyl, and I ended up having to hand cut this just because my Cricut was being difficult and didn't want to do print then cut. So I just hand cut that, but you can use the print and cut feature so that you don't have to hand cut that. So now that I have those printed and cut, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a large piece of transfer tape here to start with applying the bats to the image or to the orange cup. So this is my very last piece of transfer tape. So I'm trying to utilize this as long as I can until my other roll of transfer tape comes in. But we're going to apply this wrap just like we would a piece of adhesive vinyl on a full wrapped tumbler. So I'm just going to adhere the transfer tape on one end, and then using my squeegee tool that I purchased from Amazon, I'm just going to flatten and secure the transfer tape to all of my bats. So you'll see that my transfer tape doesn't reach all the way up to the top, but because my transfer tape is on a good portion of that, I'm not too worried about that section. But I did have a section down at the bottom that I was worried I wouldn't stick, so I just cut off that extra and just place that right on top. That way it would be a more seamless, streamlined transition from the transfer tape to my cup. So I'm now going to grab my orange cup, which has been already sanded and washed off, and I am going to begin applying the bats to my tumbler. So we're going to apply this just like you guys have seen me do with adhesive vinyl on full wrapped tumblers. So I'm just going to peel back that backing and fold it back, and then I'm going to begin adhering one end of the bats to my cup. I always make sure that when I am doing any sort of full wrap that I am then wrapping it all the way around the cup with the backing still on to ensure that it's going to meet on the other end. So I had done that and then realized that it wasn't quite lined up and it was going to be wonky, so I needed to take it off and start over. So it's important that you kind of get your first line of transfer tape on straight first. That way you have way less issue when you are trying to get it to wrap all the way around the cup. So again, I'm checking again to make sure that it's going to meet perfectly on the other side and isn't too far up or too far down before I begin removing the backing and getting all the bats adhered to my cup. So now that I'm pretty sure is going to meet on the other end, I'm going to push down that end of my transfer tape, and just like I have before, I'm going to very slowly move the backing and use my squeegee tool to push down the transfer tape and bats onto my cup. So this is a process that I've told you guys before. It is something that takes just a little bit of time. Take your time, be patient with it, don't rush. I feel like that's very important when you're doing a full vinyl wrap on anything. It can be very frustrating sometimes. So definitely just take your time. Don't rush the process. If you have to, pull it off and start over, certainly feel free to do so. And I promise you'll have a much easier time if you just take your time and work with your vinyl as you go. So I'm struggling a little bit here with the bat placement because the edge of the wing wasn't quite attached to my transfer tape. So I just had to readjust a little bit just to make sure that the bat was going to fit correctly in that space. So before I pulled off the rest of the backing on that sheet. So I'm all the way to the end now, and what I'm going to do is just remove the last piece of the backing, and while that is finished, while I'm almost done wrapping that, I'm then going to leave the very edge up and remove the first piece of the transfer tape. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I place this on top, my bats are going to get stuck to the transfer tape on the other side and not the actual cup. So I want to pull up that first section of transfer tape first before I secure that last end of the transfer tape and final bats. So once that is done, it's literally just quick and easy to just pull off slowly that plastic transfer tape right off of the bats. Everything is adhered beautifully, and now all I have to do is apply my skull to the center. Now with my cup back in my cup cradle, I'm just going to peel off the backing from the skull. I'm just placing it on my cup to just determine where I want it to go, and I'm literally just going to peel this off and stick it. I'm not really going to do anything crazy as far as measurement. I have a pretty open space here, so pretty easy to get this right in the center. So I'm going to start in the middle and then very carefully smooth out the edges, making sure I don't get any bubbles or wrinkles. And then yeah, that's it. This is going to go back on the turner, and then it is finally done. So 2 final coats of epoxy for this cup. Like always, I always use amazing clear cast with UV protection, but this is the first spooky cup of the season and I couldn't be more proud. I hope you loved today's video. If you did, give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again next week. Bye!